morning, everyone. I'm Cheryl Davila, founder of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force and a former council member in the city of Berkeley. We're going to do a land acknowledgement, and then we'll start our day. Usually we have Karina Gould, the tribal chair of the Confederated Villages of Lejeune and a co-founder of Segurite Land Trust. However, I just received a text this morning that she's not able to be with us this morning. She's out of state and not ready or able to do this, unfortunately. So I am going to read a land acknowledgement because we are here in the city of Berkeley on Ohlone territory. And let me just pull that up so I can read that quickly. So we would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are sitting on the territory of the Huichin, the ancestral unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Lejeune Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familiar descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land. As members of, Alameda County, some of the cities also are in this Ohlone territory. And we recognize the history of the land on which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive, flourishing members of the Berkeley and the broader Bay Area communities today. So if you're not in the Bay Area, take some time to learn about the original people of your land and where you call home. And also, we all know that Karina is an amazing woman, and she always sets us on this wonderful start of the day. So she puts us through a meditation. I'm not prepared to do any of that. So I'll just get moving with my words, my welcome. So welcome to Climate, Ableism, and Accessibility. Like I said, I'm Cheryl Davila, the founder of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Task Force and the former council member in the city of Berkeley. And I also am a founder of Berkeley Equity Summit Alliance, which is a BIPOC Berkeley community, consists of BIPOC Berkeley community members. And I'm part of Mobilize Berkeley, which is CEMTF and UC Berkeley Student Environmental Resource Center. I also do, I'm on the advisory committee for the Interfaith Council of Alameda County and the network of elected officials and staff. And I'm part of Friends of Adeline, which is a Berkeley neighborhood group, South and West Berkeley. So I want to thank you all for being here this morning. This is our third series in the fourth virtual summit series. And I want to thank Jack and Karina Templis, who's part of the steering committee and the planning and logistics. And I want to thank our amazing fellows, Natalie, Livy, Janelle, and Karis, for working with CEMTF this year. We're trying to expand the Alameda County scorecard that we created, that some fellows and CEMTF and I created last year or earlier this year, and they're going to expand on that. And I also want to thank our speakers today, Emma, Mackay, Henry, Sheila, Sadie, Vance, and Alex. And I want to thank all of you for being here and taking the time this morning to join us. And I also want to thank those who donated or will donate, because there's always time to do that. So we've been around for 4 years. This is the second year that we've had fellows, and we are very grateful and thankful for that. And we are committed to talk about climate and topics that are not usually talked about. And we hope that in the spring of 2024, hopefully February, maybe later, we'll be able to have a 5-year anniversary in-person celebration. So we're looking forward to that. Now, ableism is defined as discrimination in favor of able-bodied people. And accessibility is the quality of being able to be reached or entered. So this morning, we're going to be talking about climate ableism and accessibility. And I know that me as a senior now, I've really been thinking more about these topics and the impacts. So we're going to learn a lot more about that this morning. And you can enable your captioning. And I know that the CEMTF needs to do a better job with accessibility issues, and I hope to have that accomplished in our immediate future. So I guess we're probably just going to get started now if everyone is ready, because since Karina's not here, we're going to be a little ahead of schedule. So just sit back, get your coffee, get your tea, and enjoy what you're going to hear this morning. And first off, we're going to have Livy, one of our UC Berkeley College Core Fellows, introduce the first panel. So Livy, take it away. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you so much for waiting on me, but I just wanted to introduce the Emergency Preparedness and Climate Action, insights from a cross-disability perspective. It's going to be Emma Martin, Mackay Freeman, Henry Michael, and Sheila Gunn-Cushman. We're so excited to have you guys. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us about everything you guys are going to be discussing. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Emma Martin. I use she, hers pronouns. I work at the Center for Independent Living as our community engagement program manager. The Center for a quick visual description today, I'm a white person with short brown hair pulled back into a bun. I'm wearing a tan shirt with a bolo tie. Every time I wear a bolo tie, I say, it's for you. It's for you while I'm wearing this bolo tie today. And I'm in my home office, which has a tan wall with some art prints and another computer monitor behind me. As I said, I work as the community engagement program manager at the Center for Independent Living, and I'm here with my colleagues who hold various roles in various programs at the Center for Independent Living, and they'll be introducing themselves in just one moment. Before we begin, I just wanted to give a quick, who is the Center for Independent Living, or CIL? CIL is a cross-disability advocacy and direct services organization here on Ohlone lands in Berkeley. Our main office is in the Ed Roberts campus in South Berkeley, and we also have another office in West Oakland and then also in the Fruitvale neighborhood of Oakland as well. CIL was founded in 1972 as a peer-led disability organization. It was born out of the independent living movements and disability rights movements, and also helped catalyze those movements. And we we're the first independent living center in the country, and then after served as the model for 400 plus independent living centers across the country and around the world. So I feel honored every day to work at CIL and be part of an incredible team providing a lot of different diverse and peer-led services for people with disabilities in our community. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues for introductions for themselves, and then we'll kick off our panel. I'll pass it to Henry next.
Hi, I'm Henry. I use he and they pronouns. I am the Center for Independent Living's Emergency Preparedness Outreach Coordinator and Trainer. I do a lot under that umbrella, but essentially I do a lot of the community outreach and do presentations and emergency 101 prep, things like that. I am, just for a visual description, I am a white person with short brown hair and a goatee. I'm wearing a very fun button down with a bunch of cheetahs and flowers on it today. Thanks for having us, guys. I'll pass it to Mackay.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Mackay Freeman. I am the systems change advocate. What I do as a systems change advocate help mitigate, remove barriers to access inclusion for persons with disabilities and work with grassroots organizations and agencies to do that. I am a Black woman with brown children's hair. I go by the pronouns she, her. I am wearing a red turtleneck, and I have my ventilator. So you see there's a tubing attached to my trach area. I am blurred on Zoom, and what else? I'm very glad to be here. And with that, I'll pass to Sheila.
Hey there. Did that work? Yeah, it did. Okay. I am Sheila Gunn-Cushman. Well, actually, it's labeled as Sheila Gunn-Cushman. I'm in the middle of a name change. I'm Sheila Gunn now. The Emergency Preparedness Coordinator at the Center for Independent Living. I'm white in my 50s. At the moment, have headphones on, need a haircut. Wearing a green and blue sweater with a pendant on today on a gold chain that has two fishes on it. I love jewelry, so I'm always wearing something. And I use Z and Zir pronouns, but I'm not picky. And that's it. What I do as the emergency preparedness coordinator is that we all work as a team, and we all do a lot of cross pollinating, but I am one of the folks that works with the disability disaster access and response system that will help folks get to safety if power is shut off and they have medical needs that require power to live. And so when weather things happen, we are popped into service and we help folks be ready for that, weather that and all that. I don't feel like that was a very good last sentence, but anyway.
That's good.
Great.
Perfect, Sheila.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, I wanted to thank you so much for for everyone talking a little bit about what they do kind of day in and day out in their jobs at CIL. That was something that I wanted to talk about just a little bit. I really loved Cheryl's introduction of the CEMTF workshop series as a space that is dedicated to talking about climate in the intersections of other topics that are not usually discussed. And I love that because it's also one of the reasons why our emergency preparedness program at CIL exists, is because when it comes to emergency preparedness and climate resiliency, the experiences, expertise, knowledge, access needs of people with disabilities are so often not present, considered, valued, centered. And so that's one of the whole reasons why our program exists. And in our emergency preparedness program at CIL, I think Henry and Sheila touched on this a little bit, but we do lots of different things and have many different services for cross-disability communities in Northern Alameda County, including we do a lot of individual emergency planning and emergency planning workshops with individuals. We hold community educations on our emergency preparedness 101 for cross-disability communities and older adults. We support people in building out go bags and stay boxes and figuring out what their emergency and evacuation plan looks like for them and their access needs and their assistive technology and lots of other considerations that can sometimes be disability and older adult specific. We also, as Sheila mentioned, do kind of higher ground response work during disasters and emergencies and making sure that folks have the resources that they need, or helping folks relocate to places with power and making sure that they have the material resources needed during power outages and other disasters and emergencies, plus lots of other things that come across our desk. So that's just a little bit about our emergency preparedness program. And I'm sure our services and some of the things that we do will also be kind of interwoven throughout our panel this morning. But with that, we can kick it off. So the first question, I'm sort of in a moderator type role today, but I also have some thoughts that I'm going to jump in with as well. But I'll kick us off with our first question. I wanted to ask our panelists if we could offer the audience a working definition of ableism to really ground our panel and also just the events of today's workshop. And then I also wanted to ask, why is understanding ableism important when thinking about climate justice and emergency preparedness? I may kick it to Makai first.
The ableism. Cheryl said it, and as we talk about ableism, I think it's very important to realize it's centered around what is considered normal functioning. When you have perfect disability, you think that so-called able-bodied or moving in a normal way. However, or activities that are considered normal in everyday places. However, for our community, which is not exclusive community, because anyone can become disabled. This is more just detrimental because we have different abilities and functionings that is not given credit, disability, or acknowledged. And the oppression comes in because we don't fit in as the normal functionality. So when looking at climate action and measures, I would like to invite all of us here to think about how we are censoring ableism and not different forms of abilities and functioning in our planning for a more climate-friendly, inclusive world. So that's my question for the day and for all of you. many of you will be involved in public policy, planning, or efforts for climate action. And then my second part is how are we centering equity? And equity is not a buzzword. Equity means having the most space and inclusion and leveling in some areas, the playing field in regards to access, funding, and in our planning for programs. So I'll go back to my first question with ableism. So when you're in a room or thinking about policy measures, how are you thinking about those people with low vision, who are blind, mobility, access, deaf individuals? How are you thinking about access? How are you thinking about your program piece? Is there anyone in the room from those populations that can inform your planning, your thinking discussion? We have a number of initiatives with scooters, bike lanes, transportation, but the ideal issues where we have new obstacles to those programs because they're not informed by universal design or heavily influenced by ableist actions. Like, for instance, scooters. Not everyone's able to ride a scooter. There are accessible scooters, but you don't see those out in the public. And then when you're talking about access on the city streets, now you all know sidewalks is very limited amount of space. So how are we able to have a discussion about access and equal access on our city streets? Policies. As we transition to a more climate-friendly measures, how are we factoring in low income, very low income communities, largely disabled communities because of oppression and discrimination in the workplace? Unfortunately, a lot of community relies on Social Security and on fixed income. How are we thinking about leveraging public dollars to subsidize or fund communities of very low, extremely low incomes and communities of color and our senior population? So there are no quick answers, but what I want to give onus to is having robust, engaged discussion and communities, cross-section community of disabilities at the planning table. And being the ones giving solutions and input instead of other people talking about our community and not being informed by our experiences and expertise. We're all experts on our own experience, right? So that's what I want to share today. I know my colleagues have experiences that they will share about ableism and access as well. Thank you.
Mikai, what I wanted to add is something that you gave us, which I thought was great, which is I would like folks to think about how do you perceive yourselves as people? What I mean is like, do you do like do you feel like you are do you feel like you know what to do in your life? Like just really easy stuff like you know how to get up in the morning, you know how to dress, you know how to uh, eat, you know how to, but not just the physicality of it, and not just the mental part of it, but as how would you like to be perceived, and how do you perceive yourselves, and juxtapose that with how you think about people with disabilities and or people who look different than you in some way that you don't know what to do with or don't know how to handle or whatever. I don't know how to say that well, but that whole perception of self is a thing, because part of ableism to me is that people think of us as not able to fill in 50,000 blanks. My eyes don't work, and I'm weaker on one side of the body than on the other. And I have asthma and I have seizures, and the asthma is mild and the seizures aren't that often, but they can be a real pain in the neck when they actually pop up. But when somebody sees the white cane, all of a sudden I'm 3 years old. I'm not. No. But and Mikai gave us that perception of self concept that I wish I'd thought of 30 years ago.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, thank you, Sheila. Thank you, Makai. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, and this is something I've really been chewing on for a few weeks in preparation for our panel and in conversations with you all. Just that core question, like, why is understanding ableism critical when thinking about climate justice and emergency preparedness? And I really appreciate that both of your responses touched on like people's identities and lived experiences, and also took a really intersectional approach when thinking about those things. And yeah, when I'm thinking about ableism and climate justice and emergency preparedness, it's important in my mind, not only because people with disabilities are 2 to 4 more times more likely statistically to die or be injured in climate emergencies, and not only because emergency response evacuations and shelters are still woefully inadequate to meet the needs of people with disabilities, and not even only because people like disabilities are literally created by like toxic air, water, pollutants, and other fallout from the climate crisis, but really also because, and it sounds like maybe very 101 at this point, but coming back to this idea that all systems of power and oppression under which we live are connected. And I think Makai's answer really touched to that a lot, and that they're interrelated. And ableism is, deeply intertwined with white supremacy and capitalism and classism and colonialism and militarism, which are literally all of the things that are strangling our planet, right? And so yeah, I just appreciated the way that both of your answers kind of opened the ground to those connections, just understanding the ways that ableism is part and parcel to every other system of oppression under which we live, and that is also contributes to the climate crisis as well. And I just wanted to plug, there's a couple of really cool folks with disabilities, disability justice organizers who write a lot about the connections between ableism and other systems of power. And I wanted to plug for folks in the audience here to check out the work of T.L. Lewis, who's an abolitionist, community lawyer, educator, and organizer, does a lot of work around deaf and hard of hearing folks in prison. And they have a really great lecture, their Longmore lecture, called Longmore Lecture, Context, Clarity, and Grounding, is a really incredible resource to look into. And Mia Mingus, also, who's a transformative justice and disability justice organizer and educator, also does a ton of work talking about ableism and how it connects to other systems of power under which we live. So I just wanted to plug those two folks, also whose work really, I think, has informed like me and other folks on the team in terms of thinking about ableism, emergency preparedness, and climate resiliency. So I'll leave that first question there.
And can you put that your references in the chat?
Yeah, totally. I can link specifically to both of these pieces of work in just a couple of minutes.
I put T.L. Lewis in there, but that's all I had. Yeah.
So I wanted to move to our next question for our panel. What are some ways that emergency preparedness and climate resiliency might look different for people with disabilities and older adults, or people with access and functional needs, which that might be a new term for folks, but I think it's going to come up a lot today. So I wanted to plug that kind of at the beginning. And Sheila, I might turn this to you first today.
Yeah. So, access and functional needs, you're going to laugh because by the time I'm done, there's just about everybody in this room is going to be like, me, at least once, and probably way more than that. So access and functional needs. When I first heard the term, I was like, oh, geez, this is another buzzword for disability. We don't want to say the D word. Oh dear. And when I talk about blindness, there's this George Thorogood song, Bad to the Bone. Well, I go, I go, blind, blind to the bone, because nobody wants to say the B word, right? So I'm like, okay, let's name it and claim it, and because it just is. So, but access and functional needs is not that. It's wider than that. And it took me a minute to figure it out. And once I figured that out, I really, really dove into this access and functional needs. So basically, access and functional needs is we have these emergency planning things at the cities and counties and state and federal, and we have these structures, we have these infrastructures that we think are going to work for people, but there are people that things don't work for. For example, if all the alerts are in English, who does that leave out? Anyone who doesn't speak English. And that's the foul buzzer, by the way. And and anything that is only audio, who does that leave out? Someone who can't hear. And there'll be a lot more of those. I just won't use it anymore. But there's, the assumption that flashing lights, well, I can't see that. Signage, not unless it's in Braille. Um, and so that's disability, but it's also somebody who doesn't speak the language, doesn't speak English as a first language, or doesn't understand English well. It's um, it's older adults, it's folks with disabilities, but it's also folks who are temporarily not able to move around as normally they would, like maybe someone who's pregnant, or someone who's recovering from some sort of operation, or thing where they've been in some medical rehab and now they're walking with a device, or something like that. Someone with laryngitis can't speak. That's not a disability long term. It's just you had bad allergies this week and now you can't talk, and but now this doctor's asking you what's wrong with you, and you you can't tell them, so you have to write. And then if you don't have a pen and paper, so this is anything that makes it hard to access the systems and to understand the systems and to respond to the systems and make sure that you get what you need and that you are okay. Anything that affects that is an access and functional need. It's anyone who's poor, anyone who is dependent on public transportation and or doesn't have, there isn't good transportation where they are. Um, anyone who needs something to, like if you live on the second floor of a building, um, and in case of fire, use stairs. Yeah, that's not the foul buzzer. That's the Pac-Man. Wee wee wee, right? So that's access and functional needs. I think I got them all pretty much, didn't I?
Yeah, that was great, Sheila. Thank you. I just wanted to I was thinking as Sheila was talking and just from the question, now that we understand what access and functional needs are, you know, Emma asked, what are some of the ways that things might look different for somebody with disabilities when it comes to emergency preparedness, when it comes to resilience in that way, right? One of the things that I think about is that we sort of all do what we can, and some of us can do less than others in the way of, let's say, trash production, right? Like I'm thinking of things like incontinence supplies. There, I use a wheelchair. I'm a paraplegic. There's lots of things that come along with that, right? That people don't think about, like like incontinence supplies, a lot of trash there, right? People that use needles, people that use any kind of trash, right? That maybe can't be recycled or can't be put in certain things, right? And I think about that a lot of I don't have a choice but to produce this trash, right? I don't have a place to put that trash. I don't, and thinking in that, right, is just sort of the idea of individual efforts versus systemic efforts, right? And thinking about just all of the different, I think about how much agency do I really have in this, right? When they're multinational corporations and militaries that are the biggest polluters in the world, right? It doesn't mean that I'm just going to go willy-nilly and produce all the trash I want, but it does mean that we have to be fighting these systemic systems before we ever are, it doesn't matter what I'm able to do individually if we're not fighting these systems, right? And that's something that comes to my mind a lot, and that it just looks different for me. My efforts are going to be different. My efforts are going to be within the systemic change instead of individual change, because that's not what I can do, right? Yeah, that's
Can I also
yeah.
piggyback? I think Henry just made it right spot on, because so much of our climate action rhetoric is on the individual, and there's even punitive stuff about, oh, well, you're not recycling, or you're using straws, or you're using a plastic cup. And going back, she was definitely a functional needs. There are just many functional needs of those persons with disabilities, where using a straw, for me, I tried the metal straws, and they're too heavy. I tried bamboo, and they don't deal well with my lips. So I do use plastic straws. Yet sometimes when I in restaurants, they don't offer me straw. I have to carry my own straws, and that's a barrier for me. It means I can't hydrate right then. So, again, it goes back to ableism, it goes back to how we think about policies, how those are implemented. And a systemic, as Henry mentioned, a systemic frame of reference, then providing onus and, in some cases, penalties on personal actions, not being informed by a broader range of abilities. So that's what I wanted to add. And also, the fact, as Sheila mentioned, many of us today may not have abilities we were able to do 10 years ago. And many of us have different abilities, maybe 1, 5, or even tomorrow, that will necessitate a more extent acknowledgement of abilities. So by thinking of how different bodies navigate in this, you're also thinking about yourself, not just persons with disabilities, are thinking about yourself, because unlike any ethnic or other community, our community accepts all. And we are here as activists, working in our communities for the extension and the inclusion of all in navigating their communities equally. So thank you for inviting us, and I will turn it back to Emma.
I just wanted to thank you all so much for offering different considerations and ways that emergency preparedness and thinking about climate resiliency and climate action might look different for people with disabilities, and just really hearing the point in your different ways of saying it, that there just isn't just one way, and that our movement needs to be nuanced enough and capacious enough to hold all the different ways that people individually and systemically might be working towards combating the climate crisis and climate chaos. And so thank you all so much for that.
Are we good? I got a little lost in my head maybe, but do you want me to do the bit about transportation, or is Henry going to do stuff first? I'm lost.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, if you have another point to jump in on, please do.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. Okay. Well, I didn't want to squeak Henry. So one of the things that oh, maybe no, I'm not. Okay. So one of the things that I think is an assumption when we talk about emergency preparedness and emergency planning on individual levels too, is that you're supposed to carry all these supplies with you everywhere. Like an emergency can happen at any time, right? So, like, am I going to really carry 3 gallons of water with me everywhere I go, every minute of every hour of every
Yeah,
day?
on the bus.
On the bus, on the BART? Am I like walking? I I can't carry that much. Um, and 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 so I can't carry that much, but that's not even about disability. I don't think that most people can carry that much. And some people can pull something along behind them, but I can't do that. And I wouldn't want to heft that up onto a bus anyway. Um, so, there's that. But so I go, well, what can I carry on my back? Because what I have, I don't have a car. I don't have a bike with a great big nice basket or little trunk. What I have is me. So I got a backpack that has more room in it. I that actually has a bag on the left and a bag on the right, so that one of them is my trunk and the other one is my enlarged purse. And so I can carry some stuff around. But I also figured out that maybe I should put some stashes of things in places where I go. And this doesn't always work because you got to keep track of what stashes you have where, and all that, and things change and you forget to update your stuff, or it's hard. It's an ongoing thing. And it if you make emergency preparedness part of your maintenance, just daily, weekly, monthly, it doesn't have to be a big thing, but it is until you get it in your rhythm. So we have to be resourceful. But the plus side is I'm blind. I don't use paper. I can't read. I can read Braille, but I'm actually a slow Braille reader. And even in Braille, there are Braille displays, so we can turn that into electronic and not kill trees. I want no trees killed on my behalf. Gaia's got enough troubles as it is keeping oxygen in our air. I want every tree that we can spare to be loved and appreciated, not killed for stupid paper. And so I'm on a crusade about that for myself, but I also know that there are a lot of people who, for a lot of reasons, electronics is just not a thing that really works for them. And so there has to be no wrong door. We have to figure out how to poke a hole in the wall and make a door where there isn't one for folks, because everybody has to be able to fit here. We born this way and I was born on this planet, so I must be here for a reason, and therefore there must be space for me.
Great. Thank you
Oh,
so
yeah,
much,
for a
Sheila.
moment.
Wonderful. One thing that comes up often in emergency and disaster management, and one thing that comes up just in our work in our program quite often, is that this idea that help is not guaranteed, especially from emergency management and first responders and kind of governmental organizations. Help is not guaranteed. You can't assume help. It's kind of like an emergency prep 101. But knowing that, like, what then? Like, what does that mean actually for people with disabilities and people with access and functional needs? What can we do now, like knowing that really critical piece of information? And Sheila, I know you just spoke, but you have such great thoughts on this. I've heard you share in different places and spaces, and wondering if I can turn it to you
Yeah.
first.
I was laughing because I was like, oh, again. um so in emergency preparedness, they say, and planners and things, they say it's up to you. First responders may not be there, they may be impacted, it's up to you. But if that's true, um you know it's up to me, and okay, I can only do so much. So here we go with the gaming mentality again, where it's like, okay, my amount of damage points I can take and my amount of mana, which is life in some games, and all that is, diminishes because I'm not able to, crawl down 10 flights of stairs. um, and I can't do it. I can walk, but I can't do that. Um, but if I have all this knowledge, but I can't do whatever in the moment, um, you watch the fire come closer, for example, and you can't do much about it. The only thing I mean, you just have to have made infrastructure ahead of time and made connections ahead of time as much as possible, because that's not always possible. And it's like another access and functional needs is if somebody doesn't know the area. So we live in a very, people come here from all over the world who don't know the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area at all. And for all I know, folks on this call may be, I know some of our panelists are not from the state of California, so they don't know San Francisco or Oakland the way I might. And if there comes a moment when they're supposed to know what the siren means and which siren means what and all that, but they don't, then they don't know how to respond, and they don't, and if they have a language barrier too, they're just kind of looking around going, why is everybody running? Where are we going? What's happening? What, you know, and maybe they don't know, maybe they don't speak enough English to ask it in English. They're just like looking puzzled. And so communications is seriously a big thing. um, the other thing that I've been saying for 30 years is that there is no fairy godmother. I swear this society doesn't feel comfortable directly dealing with me as a person with a disability. They wish that they had some intermediary so that they wouldn't have to deal with me directly. And just in case somebody doesn't know, that's really alienating. That's really discouraging. And that's really, it doesn't make your flower grow, it makes it wilt. But everybody acts like that. And for example, I can get off a bus, I can just ask somebody, hey, can you show me where the door to such and such a store is? And I walk to the door with them, and then they go their way and I go mine. And I walk in, and the salesperson says, where's your companion? And I'm like, what companion? And I'm literally not thinking what they're like, I don't know what they're talking about. They're like, the person that brought you in here. I don't even know their name. They don't know mine. We were strangers. I used them as a little hitch ride to get here. I No, there is no companion. You stick with me. What are you going to do about it? Right? So
Yeah, Sheila, that's
um
sorry, can I just to echo some of what, like, I think that's such a good point. And thinking about the idea, right, that like there's no fairy godmother. We don't, I've heard you say before, like, you are the fairy godmother, right? Um and I think, I think about my background before doing this is working with folks experiencing houselessness. And I think you're right in this. There's this assumption that these systems already exist, and it takes the onus off of me because there's got to be a system for that already. There's got to be a fix for that, right? Thinking about,
and to some degree there is, but there's gaps and people don't know
right,
about it and all that. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. There's not these fixes that we think there are. I would get that all the time, the assumption of like, wait a minute, what do you mean you have to go to a housing meeting and you know fight to see who gets the housing, right? Like, there's not, what do you mean there's not enough of it? What do and I think about it's the same way I think with this, right? Is just that there's this assumption that these systems already exist, or like, oh well, yeah, of course we've seen the signs that say in case of fire use the stairs, but like there's things set up for that. I don't, I think there's this assumption that that's already there, right? Yeah, it's just such a good point, Sheila.
Well, everybody relies on first responders, but the first responders can't be everywhere. They're human just like us, and uh, either all of us have superhero capes or none of us do. And actually, there's in between. I can have a superhero cape about something and not about something else. I can be the fairy godmother who's exhausted at the because I've been too long away from Tirnanog, you see. Anyway, yeah, yeah.
Nothing in is, we're asking sort of what the answer is, like what's the impact, how do we manage this, right? And I think a lot of it is community, it's mutual aid, right? It's support. I think nothing replaces community, and it's such an imperative part of this work, right? I think when we do things for ourselves and each other, this like brilliance that we have, and we have, I think as disabled people, we have a lot of innovation and brilliance. And I think we talk all the time amongst ourselves about crip hacks and things that we've learned, right? And I think that's a big part of it, is learning from each other and relying on community in that way. um yeah, that's
And I just
The
have
others, oh,
Natasha.
one of the things that I think we need to remind each other of on a daily, hourly, minutely basis is, um, we just had a CPR training, and I wasn't strong enough to do it for adults. But I learned it. I learned how, I learned what to do. Maybe if I get better leverage in a certain situation physically or whatever, I can do it. But I've learned a lot. I've gone to CERT trainings. I've gone to other trainings that have to do with working in shelters, like emergency shelters. And I've learned a lot about things, and there's assumptions about what people will do in shelters who are helping. But I have had to think for myself and come up for myself with, okay, I don't know, Sheila, what can you do in a shelter? The society always looks at me and go, what do you do? You're a blind person. What can you do? I'm like, well, I got to get my license back, but I was an amateur radio operator. I can do that. I know a lot of knowledge of systemic resources and tax, and I know a lot of people who've known a lot of stuff, and I can probably look something up. And it's just w- uh, different ways of coming at things, different ways of um, not not buying into the stigma of we can't do this, we can't do that. Look, my eyes don't work. My knees are not the greatest. Um, I can walk, but not super far. I mean, I can walk a couple blocks, 3 blocks. It depends on the time of year, because that's the way my body rolls. But I can give you information all day long off the top of my head that someone else would have to look up. So that is something that is valuable. And maybe I cannot look at somebody's eyeballs and see that they are in shock, but I can use other tools to determine that. And if they don't speak English, we can get clever about communications, and it and those are things that I've had to think of, because I have folks that are my friends that have speech disabilities. So I'm like, wait, I'm not getting you. What'd you say? And and if we still can't get it, somebody pulls out their cell phone and we start texting, because that works, right? And yeah, okay, if the cell phone isn't there, then you have but it's just the workarounds and the hidden back ways that nobody knows, that we know more about, because we have to use them all the time.
And
Micah, did you, want to hop in on this question of like knowing that we can't assume help, like what now? Like what is that impact for people with disabilities? Like what can we do, for ourselves and amongst our community?
well, I think she was very clear on the creativity, and Henry on the creativity and resiliency of community in planning and strategizing as they work on emergency preparedness issues, and some of what they bring to this field. And I would like to mention allies, because until we get enough individuals who include us in the pre-planning, planning, and implementation areas regarding shelters and evacuation plans, we are going to need allies who will look around at the table or the Zoom meetings or the community meetings and say, oh, where are those with disabilities? How, in our planning for facilities and evacuation, are we thinking about emergency generators? Are we thinking about accessible entrance and exit ways? Are we thinking about routes where those who are in accessible vans, how would park, where safe harbor, how we to support our emergency uh emergency what they call responders, how to become sensitive and react appropriately with those who are blind, deaf, these differences. So I'm not just hauling bodies into buildings and not responding or receptive to their needs. So I just hope that our panel will really uh, impart going forth a lot of questions and how you can be a critical part of climate action mobilization by what we bring up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Makai and Sheila and Henry. And I think just one, to round off this question, just wanted to also leave folks with a few nuggets that, again, I feel like I take this all from like Sheila and Henry and witnessing you all do your work day in and day out. But coming back to this question, like we can't assume help and then what? A few things that I hear you all share to community members and audiences all the time are these, like, okay, if we're relying on ourselves and relying on our communities, like where can we start, and trying to break it down and keeping it super accessible for folks. And so I hear you all talk about, number one, signing up for city and county alerts being something that you can do that is super important to keeping you safe and aware. And then two, creating household emergency plans and evacuation plans that work for you and your access needs and your resources, and then practicing them multiple times. It's like, okay, that is something that you can do along with your people and your household or your family. Creating a go bag and stay box to prepare for different kinds of disasters. Also something that doesn't rely on emergency responders or management or governmental entities. That's something that you can do along with your communities to take care. And then I love this. I feel like Sheila is maybe the one that said this, but making like one of the most impactful things that you can do is making a list of your contacts and reaching out to people and coordinating ahead of time. And what Sheila said is like, who do you know? What do they know? And then who do they know? And what do they know? And just building out that web and that network to make sure that you and the people that you love and care for and in community with have the kind of supports that you need and plans that you need in case of disaster or climate emergency. So thank you all. All right. I know, Makai, I know that you have to jump off. You're being pulled in a couple of different directions this morning. I wondered if you had time for one more question. I think that I've heard you working in this space and have a lot of great knowledge in this area. And I wanted to ask you before you bow out of our panel today about just thinking a little bit more about climate change policy and some disparities that you see when it comes to climate change policy and how those impact diverse disabled communities.
Well, I mentioned earlier in terms of large community has 6 incomes, very low incomes. There's articulation that for many in our community and many not in our community for incomes, very low incomes, where policies around changing cars are going to to hybrid. Personal information, I had a car, was accessible dam, purchased in 2003, was involved automobile accident, we're still using it now. Now past every small check. But when I came to buying an accessible vehicle, tried to hold out the hybrid accessible vans, it was $70,000. Now, not many people. $70,000 plus insurance. I was thankful to get a used, a later model. But I thought about, what about the family? A single family mother with 2 disabled children, and if they're fortunate to get an accessible van, the policies about changing or incentivizing hybrid vehicles. Well, again, with Henry and his description about individual and systemic problems to that discussion about individual actions due to functional needs. How are we talking about subsidizing low income people on fixed incomes so that they can utilize climate action, whether it's hybrid, battery operated and buildings, so that they're won't be relying so much on the grid, and also thinking about the electrification. Many of individuals rely on refrigeration, thinking about insulin, other antibiotics. The power goes out, and how are we planning if we're going to be incentivizing our buildings to have, backups and less relying on gas? What are we doing now to help those communities and low-income families living in apartments, elevators? Those go out. Someone could be stuck in the 3rd floor, 4th floor for days. So it's creating another systemic barrier and lack of inclusion if we don't mean all means all, not just those communities and populations that can afford those backup devices. We had a tree fall down in my neighborhood. I rely on battery backup battery from my ventilator. Well, it was going towards 2 days, and I was really worried because another day I would have to go to the emergency ICU because of my ventilation. So it's those thoughts that we're very quick to adopt, but not thinking about the totality of our communities, which we all belong to. And that needs to change.
Thank you.
I have a quick thing here.
I'll just
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say thank you, Makai. And Makai, if you have to hop off for our panel, I just wanted to appreciate all your knowledge and brilliance in sharing so many of your lived experiences today. Much appreciated. Makai, our systems change advocate at CIL. And I wanted to also echo that is one thing, just in terms of a team that works with people to try to support them in acquiring backup power and energy, and figuring out what to do when their power does go out. Something that I've heard from a lot of different community members is that the option for them when their power goes out is to go to the hospital, and like thinking about how, harrowing that can be, how inaccessible that can be, like also the strain that puts just on a healthcare system that is already strained and burdened simply because the cost of backup power is so exorbitant and not equitable and accessible to all people in our communities, and especially thinking about lower income or working class and poor folks. And so,
and even just immunocompromised folks and how that could be unsafe. There's so many different reasons like that's not a good way to go.
Totally.
For some of us, the medical model has not been our friend, and that
Absolutely.
going to the hospital would be seriously traumatic. And
Absolutely.
there are people who would rather, there are people who would rather die than go to the hospital because
there's a created mistrust there for sure.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, and it's unfortunate, because there are totally good doctors and they're totally great nurses, but the medical model is not. It's to me, I'm not very expert in this part of things, but there's a lot of punitive things in a lot of the benefits. When we have to means test for things, it's like a punitive thing, and it's almost like you're being punished for being poor when that doesn't work. The other thing that I was going to say before I went down that road was that Kai was talking about upgrading things and getting gas out of houses. It's a statistical fact, and I don't know the numbers, but folks who live in buildings where gas is one of the energy things is it affects their lungs. And I've noticed that my lungs are worse in winter, and my heater's on in winter. I have a gas stove, but I don't use it all that often. I do, but not every day. Whereas in the winter, the heater comes on a lot because I need the house to be warmer than some people do. But the other thing is, we have to upgrade the infrastructure to make it able to carry the weight, such as with EVs that require a higher voltage and more electric infrastructure than a lot of places have yet. There are things like earthquake hardening that people can get access to. There are things like oh shoot, what's it called? Like when you I'll figure that out in a minute. But there are some systems in place, and there are some agencies that help with things, but do people know about them? Is it easy to get to them? Do we understand how to enter that door, get to that door, then enter that door? And so we need to fill in gaps. We need to connect dots to what's already available. And of course, we need to improve things and make things available that are not now.
Thank you, Sheila. Yeah, much appreciation for you and for Henry there. I'm looking at the time, it's 10:20. So I think we had another question or two for our panel, but I think we'll actually pause there and open it up to Q&A. I already saw a question or two come through the chat, so we can spend from now until 10:30 taking a couple of audience questions. I don't know if the protocol for questions was laid out, but I could say for folks who the chat is accessible, we can put questions in the chat, or perhaps folks can raise hands if they would like to say their question out loud. It looks like that feature is accessible to folks as well.
Yeah, thank you. Raising your hand and that would be great.
I'll highlight just one question that I saw come through in the chat. Someone was wondering how we can support all of us in emergency situations when we have disabilities that put us at higher risk for a harmful outcome from COVID, or we don't want to risk long COVID. The mass optional shelters are inaccessible to me and hazardous to all. So thinking about, yes, emergencies and potentially like evacuation and things related to emergencies where you might be in close proximity to other people, and how that increases risks for contracting COVID-19 or putting one at risk for long COVID. Thinking about shelters specifically, I think, is what this person was highlighting, and I wondered if either of you had thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll jump in a little bit here, and I'm sure Sheila has some thoughts too. As somebody, like I said, I worked in homelessness services for a long time, and I worked in a lot of different types of shelters. And I'll just be honest, a lot of shelters are not accessible, period. And that means as far as masks, that means as far as stairs and elevators. It means, I worked at a shelter that had bunk beds. And if you happen to draw the number of a top bunk bed that night, that's what you got, unless you were able to trade with somebody. And that really sucked. That was not accessible for people. And it was really hard to meet people's needs in that way, right? There are some, I know Emma and Mackay both were a huge part just recently in leading an action with Pathways to try to get them to be more accessible, and realizing, Pathways is one of the biggest shelters in this area, and it's one of the lowest barrier shelters, and it doesn't have the accessibility it needs. There's a lot of atrocities happening there. This is an ongoing question, right, as far as shelters go. But what I will say is a lot of it is, we talk about this a lot, of sort of finding we joke and, say corny things like find your superpower, right? But I think that's really important, is to find your skills, the things that translate in your everyday life, to be able to support one another, right? Thinking about, maybe I want to offer help, but these are things that I can offer and these are things I can't, right? And thinking about what skills in my life translate to that. And if that means I can't be in person and do those things, okay, what are the things I can do? Can I sign up for alert systems? Can I donate to this cause? Can I, meet virtually with people? Can I teach people? Can I, there's so many different things that we have, and different life experiences that we have that can lend itself to this work,
Totally. And I think,
Thing
thank you, Henry. And I think with the question from the chat, really, I think just points to and pushes us and reminds us again that accessibility, and Henry, you spoke to this too, is so many things. Physical accessibility, yes, but also programmatic accessibility, and being in year, 3 going on 4 of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, right. that masking, social distancing, other COVID-19 protocols are still incredibly vital for accessibility and need to be considered a point of accessibility, same as ramps, doorways that are wide enough,
right, exactly.
shelters, etc. So exactly. Want to make sure that we get to other questions if there are some. I see Shirley has their hand raised.
I do. Thank you, Shirley Sheeher. I'm with the CIL in Santa Rosa, and we covered Lake Mendocino, and we had the fires, and so we really experienced disabilities and access. So you're right. We had one member that had to spend most time in his chair, his electric chair, because they could not transfer him to a bed. And so we learned from that. And so what we do is we have representatives in a lot of our emergency related committees in town that, represent our community. So that's big. And the Yetis, PG&E gives out Yetis. So you have these electric, you have some power if the power goes out. And also we looked at electric car doors. because when the power was out, you're trapped in your house. And a lot of us don't have the strength to open up our garage doors. So there's a lot of work to be done, but it's nice that our community like this, this Zoom is getting it out there, that there is a need for folks in the emergency preparedness, especially with our fires and climate emergencies. So I'm so glad to be here today, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
That, sorry, I think that,
Can you? Oh, I'm sorry. I was just had a question about a Yeti, if someone could explain that, because some people might not understand what that means.
that's a generator, isn't
I
it?
can touch on that really quickly. So I think what Shirley was referencing is it's a specific program funded by PG&E, and where different independent living centers like CIL, like the independent living center where Shirley works for across the state, are subcontractors to be able to distribute portable backup batteries. It's the backup battery brand that we have is called the Yeti Goal Zero backup battery models, and we're able to give those out to folks with disabilities in our catchment area who qualify. The program is, fairly restrictive in terms of you have to, demonstrate that you are electricity dependent, that it relates to an access and functional need of yours to have electricity, and you also have to live in a tier 2 or tier 3 high wildfire threat area, or have experienced 2 or more planned safety power shutoffs in the last year or two. And so there are some restrictions to that program, but it is a good, I think, start, like one tool of like many tools that we'll want to develop in order to try to get backup power sources to folks. I also know that there are several, and I don't have all the links on me right now, but several other programs through PG&E besides the one that's associated with ILCs like ours, but other programs through PG&E where there are some rebates for different sources of backup power supply and energy. Rebates are tricky, because it means that you have to have the cash on hand to purchase it first, and then the rebate is not entire, it's only partial. But there's a few different programs out there that again are trying to like trickle these sources of backup energy into communities where they most need them. So great. With that, we're almost at 10:30. I don't know if there are any other burning questions. Otherwise, we'll want to pass it to our next speaker and panelist.
Can I
Thank
be,
you. Oh,
can
go
I
ahead,
be-
Sheila.
um,
Quick.
one of the
Yeah.
things that I know. One of the things I want to say is thinking about preparation for emergencies can be overwhelming. You're like, oh my God. like how can I help it if I can't get down the stairs and I don't have this, the electronic stuff to make it get me down the stairs and all that. What do I do? Well, even a whistle on your keychain is more preparedness than not having one. So what I say to people is, we talked about alerts, we talked about making plans, we talked about getting kits. But what I say is one thing at a time. Like if you're at the grocery store and they're having a sale on soup that you like, grab it. And one thing at a time, one thought at a time, this can be overwhelming. And it kind of is. And no matter what you do, you're not going to be completely prepared, which is scary, but it gives you permission to just be like, okay, I'm more prepared than I was yesterday. I'm more prepared than I was last month. So I say that to folks here, but if I had 1 minute and one message to get out to everybody, I guess it would be two. One is be accessible and the other one is be prepared. But yeah, and to whatever extent you can at any given moment. So any more questions?
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Center for Independent Living. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Makai, who just had to leave early. And thank you to I have to plug in my computer before it dies, sorry. And thank you to Henry. And this has been very, very, very enlightening for me. I appreciate it. And I really learned a lot here this morning. So thank you so much. And now we're going to have Livy, our fellow, introduce our next panelist. But I just want to also acknowledge that we have an amazing group of people here. But in the audience, we have Carl Anthony and Paloma Pavel, who are great climate leaders in the Bay Area. So I just wanted to give them a shout out, but go ahead, Livy. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Cheryl. Can you guys hear me? No?
Yes, yes, we can. You
You're
sound
on.
great. You're fine. You're fine. Now you're muted again, though.
Okay, woohoo! Okay,
Yay.
thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to the folks at Center for Independent Living. That was incredible. I learned so much. And I'm excited to introduce Sadie Martinez, the Access and Functional Needs Coordinator at the State of Colorado Division of HSCM.
Hey, this is Sadie. Thank you for introducing me. And I what a great panel before. I hope to also help us not be so worried as the previous panel was talking about. I call it eating an elephant. It's how you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. And so, and and then I'll also, Alice, I see your question in the comments, and I hope that I can help you answer that, or I can help answer that question as we present out. I'm Sadie Martinez. I'm an Access and Functional Needs Coordinator for the State of Colorado's Office of Emergency Management. I am Vance Taylor's counterpart here in Colorado, and I'm here today to introduce you to a memory tool, a resource memory tool that will help not only you, but partners, emergency management, and others. I am a Latina, middle-aged Hispanic woman. My pronouns are she, hers, and I have long black hair. There's some other little wisdom highlights. Some people call them gray or silver. Sometimes they shine and shine brightly. And so thank you for having me. For those of you who will benefit from captioning, I did put on voice recognition captioning that will be scrolling across the top of this screen if you're able to see the screen. For those of you who cannot see the screen, on the screen, I do have a QR code. If you're facing the screen, it will be on the right middle part of it if you want to use your assistive device to look at or to be able to pull up what I'm about to explain to you. I'm going to introduce you to a resource framework that suggests that there are resources everyone needs during emergencies, regardless of who we are, and that people need access in order to function during emergencies. And so I'm also going to drop into the chat a link to this where this QR code is going towards. So in here, what I'm trying to do is help emergency management, public health, human services, people with lived experience better understand the how-tos and tied to the must-dos of compliance, right? And what we're trying to move towards is a commitment in our systems and commitment as people with lived experience and community members in our areas that we live. And I'm showing an infographic that shows that with commitment and compliance, we all have to learn what we don't know because we don't know. So we need to become aware. I'm being told about something. We want to work towards understanding. I know why and what will change. Engagement. I see the implications for me or us, community. And then we want to move towards the positive perception where I am able to see or feel the opportunity in this change. We want to test it by, I will put myself at stake for this change. I want to be part of the planning with, the exercising with, the recovering with, the responding with and the mitigating with in my community when it's tied to disasters. We want to put that into action. So we're going to see what worked and what did not work, and we're going to continuously improve the change together. I know I'm wondering if Vance is even going to use this quote, but I heard him just recently make a quote about the difference between a plan the difference between our plan and your plan is everything. And this is what we're trying to talk about today, is seeing how we could do a plan with, so that we can make sure that we all are getting through the disaster together and recovering together, and nobody is left behind. And there's where that commitment comes in. I want to do this in a new way. And there's in this infographic, right across from it, it says compliance. Commitment and compliance meet together. And the reason why is because I'm going to introduce you to this CMIST, CMIS Resource Memory Tool. June Isaacson Kales, a California native there, where you all are at, introduced this resource model, which helps us meet our legal obligations in emergency management. Public health and human services speak in equity and inclusion and accessibility. Emergency management speaks in resources and accessibility. Now, when somebody with a lived experience, it helps emergency management understand what accessibility is. There are a bunch of good people trying to do good things, so they just need to learn what they don't know because they don't know. And then we're able to move towards that commitment and help us comply with the laws in our protected classes, such as Section 504, Americans Disability Act, Civil Rights, Civil Liberties, our aging adults, older adults laws, all of them. And our commitment helps us include the how-tos tied to the must-dos, and compliance shuts us down. And so that's what we're trying to move beyond. So we're going to play a little game. If you are able to, there's a feature under reactions that you are welcome to use. You're welcome to also unmute and say yes or no. You're welcome to put it into the chat. So it's up to you, whichever way you'd like to do it. But I'm going to ask you a few questions, and if you'll raise your hand, give me some reactions. If you're not able to, again, feel free to unmute and let me know if that is the easier way, just, or whatever way you best like to interact. I would love to hear it. I'm wanting to learn from you all as well as we grow in here. So with that, get ready. Here comes the game. All right. Have you ever been able to hear the message due to too much noise? Example, at an airport, a conference, a classroom, a microphone not being used, or maybe you may be deaf. Awesome, seeing some hands going up there. Have you ever couldn't see the information because text was too small, or the colors were too dark or too light, or missing contact lenses or glasses, or maybe you are blind? Raise your hand, chat, yay, seeing some reactions going on there. Have you ever received directions or instructions that left you with more questions? Seeing those going up. Have you ever traveled to a place where you didn't understand the language? All right. Have you ever not had access to internet, phone, cell service, or at your destination you were visiting? I would tell you that one makes me really, really not happy. My team members are on this call, and we went somewhere in very rural Colorado, and we were not able to function because we did not have Wi-Fi. Made me grouchy. All right. And then just want to let you know that those questions were all tied to communication resources. All right. Again, have you ever been unable to eat the meal provided due to a food allergy, gluten-free, lactose, maybe against your religion? Awesome. Seeing some responses there. Have you, a family member, maybe your fur children, maybe your service animals, your livestock ever got sick away from your primary medical providers or insurance coverage? Seeing some responses there. Have you ever misplaced your medication, vitamins, or other medical resources while traveling or evacuating? Boy, that messes us up. Even if you use, like, I use some vitamins just to make sure that I could keep my energy. And man, when I leave those behind, I am miserable. All right. Have you ever, I know you all have probably experienced this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Have you ever been out without power in a storm due to extreme heat or extreme cold? Awesome. All right. Those are all maintaining health and medical resources. All right. Have you ever had difficulty paying for something because ATMs were not working or the power was out? Or you may not had enough funds to be able to pay for maybe a hotel because you had to evacuate, or wherever you're going with that. Perfect. Seeing some hands up. Have you ever not known where the supply store or power equipment is in the geographic areas of the city you were visiting? Awesome. Have you ever not been able to drive due to not having gas money, glasses, contacts, or maybe you don't even own a transportation car or resource? All right. Have you not been able to get to the destination due to public transportation not operating? Yay. Now, have you ever had to leave behind maybe your dental partials, hearing aids, or batteries, and you needed them in order to function? All right. Those are all independence resources. All right, now we're going to ask this question. Have you ever needed a pharmacy, a grocery store, maybe childcare, behavioral health services that were unavailable in the places you were visiting? Maybe your medication, maybe it was left behind or you didn't bring enough and you had to stay longer, and your medication is really hard to get. And so they had the town did not have it, so they had to ask for it to get here at a delayed time. Have you ever had siblings, children, parents, grandchildren, or another family member to care for? Maybe a family member or friend in memory care. Nice. Have you ever not known the non-emergency contact numbers such as fire, police, ambulance, where to get your emergency alerts where you were visiting? All right, this one is I always do this one intentionally. Have you ever been unable to take your 72-hour emergency kit go bag due to travel restrictions? Maybe due to not having funds to build a 72-hour kit, or you don't even know what a 72-hour kit is and what should go in it. Yay, seeing some reactions there. Those are all support services and safety resources that I just asked you about. All right. Have you ever had equipment or vehicle breakdown away from home? Oh, so frustrating. Seeing that come up. Have you ever had to depend on another for a ride or rental vehicles or public transportation while you were traveling? Awesome. And then have you ever experienced a road closure to your destination? Now, this one's really interesting when you live in a town that only has one way in and one way out. It becomes a situation where we want to find alternative ways to make sure that people are not left behind. All right, and these are all transportation resources. Well, with that, I heard earlier that with one of the previous panelists talking about access and functional needs. And do you consider yourself a person with access and functional needs? In Colorado, we think of people with access and functional needs that are people who need access to resources in order to function, regardless of who we are, regardless what demographic we fall under. It is just because we are people who need access to resources. And so we use this wonderful resource framework, a memory tool called CMIST. And in there, CMIST, it stands for communication resources, maintaining health and medical resources, independence resources, support services and safety resources, and transportation resources. CMIST allows for your ability to identify what your actual resource needs are, giving you dignity and respect, and not having to identify as a person who is vulnerable or under-resourced or underserved or whatever label. It helps us actually, even special needs, it helps us identify what are the actual resources needed. Because a lot of people who have diabetes don't identify as a person with a disability. Those who use CPAP machines, a lot of them do not identify as a person with a disability. Those who use life-saving medication do not identify as a person with a disability. And if it's having to identify as a person with a disability, it could also leave people out and not get the resources that one is needing. So being able to say, hey, I need the actual maintaining health or medical resources, such as my diabetes medication or food, then I'm able to the emergency managers are better able to understand what the resource is needed. It's not being able to say, hey, I'm a person with a disability, or even getting reports that there is 40 people in this shelter that have a disability. Does not help emergency management know what the actual resource need is. And so CMIS starts moving towards that empowerment social model versus the fear of what the medical model brings. So being able to be part of the training, the preparedness, training, and exercise, identifying that I'm going to need a personal support attendant when I get to a shelter, that is a people resource that can be identified so that emergency management and sheltering can identify that what is needed for their community before a bad day happens. Want to ask, and go ahead and lower your hand if you have it lowered, because I'm going to ask you another question. I would like to know, was there anybody that did not say yes to at least one of those questions that I asked when we played Have You Ever? So one of you did not say yes to at least one of those questions, or did everybody say yes to them? And you could put it in the chat if you were. And I'm only asking this because when we do this, it's hard. I have not been in one of the trainings where somebody did not say yes to one of those questions. So if they did, I was going to ask them to go ahead and put themselves on a registry so that we could go ahead and know that they don't need any help when a bad day happens. Now, I'm saying that very sarcastically because a lot of times people with lived experience, those with living with disabilities, are asked to be put on a registry. Those registries are very hard on our community. It gives us a false sense of hope that somebody's going to come save us, or also that are they going to even know what the resource I need in order to either stay in place or to leave and evacuate. And so I always try to bring this up so emergency managers better understand that it is better to know who are my CMIST resource support service providers in the community, those programs that are helping community members like the Centers for Independent Living to be able to help help us better identify and reach community when the bad day happens. So there's multiple ways that people are receiving information versus just one way, and that way failed. Because maybe the tower burnt down and when the fire came in too fast, like we saw at Campfire. And then being able to have multiple modes of getting information and preparedness and helping us prepare individually for our CMIS resource disruptions. Then we also have personal support networks, such as our neighbor helping neighbor, family member helping family member. So nobody is left behind. And we're able to not wait until help arrives, because a lot of times and especially in more rural communities, emergency managers are a half-time employee serving a community with about 800 people, even 200 people. How can they save everybody when they're trying to save everybody, right? They're only one person. They cannot do it alone. We need to become our own personal emergency managers, working with emergency management to be able to identify the resources needed. Pardon me, I had to take a drink before I started coughing. All right. With that also, this also helps us better understand inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. So we want to ensure that we're all working together so that people learn what they don't know because they don't know. And when everybody starts knowing what their own CMIST resources are needed, and then we're able to work with our community, anybody will be able to speak up to help us because we built personal support network. We have neighbor helping neighbor, and then we put somebody that knows how to work with with community and know what the resources are, such as an access and functional needs coordinator. Or then nobody will be left behind, and this just helps us better work together. If we're waiting for FEMA to arrive, we're probably waiting and it's going to be too late. It's not federally funded, state supported, and locally driven, and being able to be part of the planning with approach really helps us better understand and work together. And with that, this always reminds me of what we're doing in emergency management. And I live by a life philosophy. My life philosophy is to not know and do nothing about it is forgivable. To know and do something
has two G's.
admirable. Is admirable, and then to know and do nothing about it is unforgivable. And so I try to hold myself accountable with that, and also I want to share that with you because now you know, and now you could be a force multiplier when it comes to you, your community, and then also working with emergency management with shared language. And I always like this quote by Matthew McConaughey from the Green Light book, and it says, "Keep in mind, we are not here to tolerate our differences. We are here to accept them. We are not here to celebrate our sameness. We are here to salute our distinctions. We are not born into equal circumstances or with equal abilities, but we should have equal opportunity." And with that, I do have my contact information. I will drop it also into the chat. My team members are Tim Mann, who is also on here, and Hannah Hoffman, who are the whole community inclusion planning specialists that support me in Colorado, here in Colorado. However, we always open up our trainings for outside members of Colorado to join us. And so this is contact information if you'd like to reach out to us. With that, what questions might you have for me? I always ask, I need at least one. I am going to go back to the question where it was asked as I was coming on here, and it was the question, what sort of political action can we do as a coalition to get shelters, emergency services, healthcare, otherwise broadly accessible to people with disabilities. I hope giving you a CMIS resource framework and working before the bad day happens with your shelter providers will help you have a language and resource identification to help it become accessible, a universal design. CMIS is a universal design, that resource memory tool is. All right. All righty. Yes, I would definitely, I need to start putting that on a slide, Jenny, but yes, I will put that quote in there. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have a little bit of a quagmire here because our next speaker isn't here. I don't know if you have I just emailed them, but I
No
don't have a
problem.
phone number for, but
Would you like?
I have a thought about something that might be of interest to folks.
go
I
ahead.
raised my hand and I don't know if it showed.
Oh, yes, it's showing now, Sheila.
So, what I was gonna say is, there is a thing in California called the Functional Assessment Service Team. And I didn't go into this because it's a bit wonky if you're not kind of in the bigger emergency preparedness bank of people who know stuff. In addition to CERT, which is community emergency response teams, where local cities and counties train folks on first aid and I call it light rescue work and things like that. The functional assessment teams are trained by the state and they work through counties. They are often county workers, but they're also community-based organization folks. They are trained in knowing about accessibility. And I don't mean that I know the measurements of how wide a wheelchair path needs to be or anything like that. But we actually, the FAST in California anyway, uses the CMIST system to kind of be a temperature taker of making sure that that all the needs are met for somebody, and I want to re-emphasize that that a lot of people that actually could be considered folks with disabilities don't want to say that. We've talked about disability and stigma and fairy godmothers and all that, and so people don't want to have to be labeled, and so they don't, but when they need help they they're in trouble. So these functional assessment service teams go to shelters and work from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and they um, talk with folks in the shelters, making sure that they have what they need, whether they call themselves folks without access and functional needs or not. And they make sure that that happens to the best of our ability, right? We all know that nothing's perfect, but Henry was talking earlier about getting drawing numbers for bunks, and I think that was for shelters like for folks who are houseless, but and I don't think that happens as much in like a Red Cross situation, but there are accessible cots for folks that have need to transfer from a wheelchair or scooter to it and need some help. So it's like there's a lot of things out there that people may not know about. That could be a whole nother thing sometime. Um, and right off the top of my head, I don't know where I can't just rattle off a resource, but um, I just wanted people to know that that exists.
This is Sadie Shelley. those are called bariatric cots, and then being able to plan before that they do have those available in there. We do mimic here in Colorado similarity to those functional assessment support teams as well. We just call them CMIS response teams, and we broke it down a little bit more. But thank you for doing that. And it looks like Vance Taylor has joined. So I am going to go and thank you all for your time and allowing me to be part of this wonderful conversation. And I look forward to hearing from Vance.
Thank you. Thank you, Sadie. That was amazing. Really appreciate you being here and all the work that you do. And next, we're going to have Janelle introduce Vance. Take it away, Janelle.
Hi, thank you so much, Sadie. All of your resources were super insightful. Up next, we have Vance Taylor, and he's the Chief of Office of Access and Functional Needs at the California Governor's Office of Emergency Service. All right, Vance, take it away.
All right, excellent. Thanks very much. Yeah, glad to get on, but I think I was a minute or two late. I was trying got a Google chat link, so I was trying that one, and it turns out not the right one. But it ended up working out, so thanks. I am sorry that I didn't get to hear Sadie. I love getting to hear Sadie speak. She's fantastic. And was very fortunate to get to spend some time with her. Just last week in Long Beach, we were at the International Association of Emergency Managers. And that, I think, was a really good opportunity because one of the things that we discussed, not just in the presentations that occurred, but and of course the side conversations that were happening, were things like how climate change impacts the whole community. And the thing that's significant about that is that I think we're finally at a place where there is a recognition that there is a difference between the way that disasters impact the general community versus how they impact individuals with access and functional considerations. And that shift in culture within emergency management is pretty huge because it wasn't always that way, right? Traditionally, historically, access and functional needs were not considered in the way people planned, prepared, responded, and recovered. And it's not that they were left out intentionally. It really came down to what I think was a lack of perspective, right? That people kind of didn't know what they didn't know. You had these really well-intentioned emergency managers who were doing the best they could. I mean, these are great people that run towards danger because they want to help, but oftentimes have a very shared lived experience. Oftentimes they come from law enforcement, former military, former first responder types, but not typically individuals with access and functional needs. And the example that I like to give people is I use a power wheelchair, and I have for most of my life. And so anytime that I enter a room, I'm scanning that room for access, right? This happens really at almost a subconscious level. That I want to make sure that I can navigate those surroundings. That if there's aisles, I can get down there. If there's desks, I can fit under them. If there's stairs or a ramp, an elevator, I'm always looking for access. But if you walk, jump, hop, skip, or run into that room with me, chances are you're not looking for any of those things. And that's okay. It's not that one is good and the other is bad. It just means that based on our lived experience, we each come at things with a different perspective. So we can look at the same thing and see it very differently. And for too long, emergency managers weren't able to benefit from the diverse lived experience of individuals within the whole community because there wasn't a process to include or involve them within the work that they were doing. So you had things like press conferences. And people thought, well, hey, a great way to get information out through press conferences. And that's true. You can reach a lot of people that way. But they wouldn't have ASL interpreters there. They wouldn't have alternate formats. They wouldn't put things out in multiple languages. And so what ended up happening is that life-saving information would go out, and people who oftentimes were already on the fringe were pushed out further because they weren't able to access, understand, or act upon the information that was being shared. People with access and functionalities didn't know what was coming. How do they prepare? What steps they should take to ensure that they could be safe, secure, and maintain their independence whenever that event was coming their way. We also saw it when it came to evacuation, that individuals would say, hey, how do I evacuate? And the answer that would come back inevitably was, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to get people on school buses and we'll bus them out of the community. And that's great until you show up in a wheelchair and ask, where's the ramp? Where's the lift? Where's the accessible transportation? And there is none. Because then you've got to make a decision. Do I stay in my wheelchair and just hope that I can remain in the impact area and somehow stay safe? Or do I get picked up out of my chair and put on the school bus, knowing full well that whenever it is I get to wherever it is I'm going, I'm essentially not going to have my legs? What does that do for independence or health or dignity? So again, terrible choices. And never caused intentionally, but rather because good people trying to do good things, but doing it without the benefit of whole community inclusion. So the fact is that we see there is a shift in this process. And part of it is because states are starting to lean forward, right? So in California, for example, we have the Office of Access and Functional Needs. This was created by the governor, placed within his Office of Emergency Services. And as chief, I serve as a gubernatorially appointed senior level executive, charged with a two-part mission. One is to identify what are the needs that all Californians have. Then two, it's to work in partnership with the community and with emergency managers to integrate those needs throughout the state's emergency management processes. Now, you've got folks like Sadie in Colorado, and you've got others now that are popping up in different states, all of whom are trying to be that voice that so often has gone unheard, who are trying to represent the communities that get hit the hardest, the communities that experience the most human suffering, the communities that have experienced the most loss of life, in ways that help emergency managers understand that it's not enough to do a lot of good for a lot of people, but that they have to stretch in order to do more good for all people. Now, let's place this within the context of climate change. So when you've got disasters, you've got individuals with access to functional needs that typically will require more time and more resources to respond. There's also going to tend to be a greater risk of things like medical duress that are going to take place. So if you've got people that are experiencing these challenges and barriers during a disaster, then what happens when we exacerbate those disasters? That's what's happening with climate change. With climate change, we're seeing that there is an increase in these events. In California, we've seen what feels like an exponential increase in the number of disasters that we deal with. We've got disasters, by the way, that aren't just increasing in terms of the number, right? But we've got disasters that are increasing in terms of the severity and the scope and the scale of the devastation that is wrought upon communities. We've got fires that have burned so hot that they've created their own weather system. We've had to come up with terms like fire NATOs, right? This is a very dangerous reality. What we're seeing is that we've got water, right, that's coming in, not just in drizzles and drops, but in the form of atmospheric rivers. It's like taking the Mississippi and dropping it on a geographic area. And we had 19 of those in the first 3 months of last year, of this year. By April, we had already had, I think, about 200% of the rainfall that we typically get in a year. And what we found was that it wasn't just that you get water and you get floods. It's that then aging infrastructure gets impacted and damaged. And so all of these things go to exacerbate the challenges and the barriers that people with access and functional needs face. So when a storm hits and power goes out, individuals that use respirators or CPAPs or BiPAPs or oxygenators to assist their breathing face the risk of asphyxiation or suffocation. when mudslides make major roads and highways impassable, people who rely on home delivery for medicine, oxygen tanks, durable medical equipment, or other critical life-sustaining assets are placed in danger. When flooding occurs and mass evacuations take place, individuals depending on accessible transportation services often become isolated due to the inability of providers to meet increased transportation demand. When fires force individuals with disabilities and people with access to functional needs to stay at shelters without the benefit of things like specialized beds with alternating air mattresses, they may develop pressure ulcers by laying on hard mattresses, sleeping in beds that cannot be adjusted, or having to remain in their wheelchairs for extended periods of time. When extreme temperatures impact individuals with access to functional needs that either don't have HVAC systems or can't afford the increased costs associated with running them, those individuals are placed at serious risk for negative health impacts. And under what scenario do we see all these hazards and others? Things like poor air quality, coastal sea rise, and other extreme events being increasingly exacerbated during climate change. It's during climate change that we see stronger, more frequent storms, that we see increased drought, that we see increased air pollution, increased wildfires, and increased extreme temperatures. The struggle, as they say, is real. And so what I would say is that to address this in a meaningful way, we have to ensure that people with access to functional needs are included within all operations and all planning and all response activities and all recovery. And so that's why we push for integration within our state emergency plan, within our disaster recovery framework, within our flood plan, our El Nino exercises, and any other document, guidance, plan, tabletop that you can think of. But all of that planning is for naught unless we incorporate these access and functional needs and the context of climate change within them. So my eldest daughter is at college right now. Actually, she comes home tonight. We're pretty excited. She'll be home for Thanksgiving. But she's out in Utah. She's at BYU. And it's pretty cool because that's where I went to school as well. So second generation is kind of fun. I had a chance to go out there. We went to a football game, which miracle of miracles, we actually won. There's a spot on that campus that is kind of near and dear to my heart. I was a student there. I was coming back from a date, and I dropped my date off at her dorm. And I cut across campus to get over to my dorm. It's about midnight. I'm traveling by myself. I came up on a spot on the sidewalk where it was clear to me that some work had been done. It looked like maybe what had happened is that they had dug up a pipe and then covered it up with dirt, but they hadn't paved over it yet. And so I wondered if this dirt, especially because it had rained, would support the weight of my wheelchair. And I looked and I saw that there was an accessible path that had been set up, but I think that would have required like an extra 12 seconds. And you know, who has that kind of time? So I thought, okay, I can do this. And I remember going right up to the edge where the sidewalk ended and this dirt began. And right before I went forward, a thought came into my mind. Don't do this. And then another thought came into my mind. Don't be a chicken. Go for it, man. And I listened to the second voice. And I punched it to go forward. And as soon as my wheelchair went in the dirt, boom, I sank like a brick. I tried to back out and I dug down further. Tried going forward and still dug down further. Then I stopped, reminded myself, look, I'm in a wheelchair, not a monster truck. This is not going to go well. Being an emergency manager at heart, I stopped to assess the situation. It's the middle of the night. I'm all by myself in a secluded part of campus, and I have no cell phone. So I thought it's going to be a long night. And as I'm wondering what I should do, I heard in an adjacent parking lot, car engine turn over. And I looked and saw the last vehicle, probably somebody that was working the midnight shift on the janitorial crew, leaving for the evening. And I start trying to get their attention. Hey, 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 hey. And I remember this guy slowed down, rolled down his window, put his arm out, waved, said, hey, and then took off. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, why would I be trying so hard to get a hold of this guy just to say hi in the middle of the night? I looked for that guy all over campus because I wanted to run him over. So he leaves. And I think, okay, well, I guess what I'll do is go to sleep. And I'll wake up in the morning, probably to some very confused looking students, wondering what happened. But surely one of them will be able to help me out. And so as I went to put my head down, I remember looking and I saw this couple holding hands out for a midnight stroll. And I thought, thank goodness for young love. And I started calling to get their attention. Hey, hey, hey. And they waved and said, hey, and kind of kept going. And I said, not this time. Help, I need help. And they started walking towards me. And as they did, I realized that luck was back on my side. Because with every step this guy took towards me, he got bigger and bigger and bigger. Until standing next to me was a 6'4" German student named Klaus. And Klaus, it was funny because his girlfriend was maybe 5 feet tall. And Klaus, it turns out, talked And he sounded kind of like the Terminator, actually, which I do a terrible Terminator accent. I'll try. He says, "What is the problem?" And I said, "I'm stuck." And Klaus looks at me and says, "I will get you out." I was like, okay. So Klaus grabs the back of my wheelchair. And before he could pick me up, I tried to say, "Hey, Klaus, not for nothing, but my wheelchair is very heavy. And plus, I'm pretty buff, so you know that adds some weight. Be careful. I don't want you to throw your back out." Before I could get out any of that, Klaus grabs the back of my chair, pulls up and lifted me up like I was light as a feather. Like this guy had been training in the wheelchair lifting Olympics and was a gold medalist. It was incredible. And I was left speechless. And I'm looking at Klaus and I'm looking at his girlfriend. And she was so proud. She's looking up like, "That's my man, you know." And Klaus looks at me and says, "You are free now. You can go." I was like, "I'm out." So I took off. And, you know, I share that with you because the reality is this. There are some times when we don't prepare, we don't take the right steps, we don't do the things we should. And we find ourselves stuck in the mud. But there are a lot of other times when, despite having done all the right things, you find yourself pushed in and you get stuck in the mud. When it comes to climate change, as a society, we're going to be pushed in and stuck in the mud. And for people with access and functional needs, it will be a dire situation. I say this because it's important for me that you understand something. Because of who you are, because of the work you do, the role you play, each of you has the unique opportunity to play the role of Klaus. You get to be the one to reach over, grab hold, and say to individuals throughout the whole community, "I will get you out." You get to lift people to health, safety, and security. It is because of you that people will be more independent and have better outcomes throughout any climate-driven event. But it is a lift. It's one that you don't have to do alone. I'm going to lift with you. Sadie's going to lift with you. Your colleagues are going to lift with you. And as we lift together, our communities will ascend. So thank you for letting me be here with you. Thank you for letting me spend some time. And thank you for the work you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Vance. That was incredible. And thank God for that guy, right? 6'4", a huge guy that was able to lift you up. That's just incredible. And yeah, we have to be aware of all these situations. I know one time my son and I were at a beach and I was like, well, we were leaving and we went to walk. I said, well, let's just go in the ocean one more time before we go away. And we went in and it was like a quicksand, I swear. I had my cell phone in my hand, my phone, my purse, all these things, and all of a sudden I just started sinking. And when I get off balance, I have a issue in my right foot, and if I get off balance, I automatically fall. So I fell, and then I couldn't get up because I was sinking. And my son had to we both had to get in the water. He fell, but he had to pull me out. So I understand how you can sink in those kinds of situations and not, be aware that that's going to happen. And luckily we were able to come through just like you were able to. So yeah, thank you for that. That was incredible. And you
Thanks,
it's
y'all.
wonderful to meet you too, and Sadie. This has been such an incredible morning so far. And we're gonna keep it moving because we're at our last speaker, and um Karis, our UC Berkeley fellow, is going to introduce Alex. Thank you, Alex, for being here.
Hello. Thank you so much, Vance. That was amazing. That was an amazing talk. Up next, we're going to have Alex speak. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Guinness. I'm the deputy director of a nonprofit called Sustain Our Abilities. I just want to note that I'm a member of a couple of the organizations that were included in the email that went out. I'm not here representing the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, or BACAN, but try to give them accessibility advice when the opportunities come up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate's disproportionate impact on people with disabilities, ableism and environmentalism, which is an issue that comes up and that I think you all have an opportunity to address, and then opportunities for action. I have limited time, so I'm probably just going to be pounding through slides here. But what we're going to talk about is, first of all, a conceptual framework for understanding disproportionate impacts on people with disabilities. And this kind of builds off of something that Vance was saying just a minute ago about, he brought up different climate impacts. He brought up different types of disabilities. And really, we as a community kind of have to look at each of those individual connections and then address them, as well as do some kind of higher level policy and activism work. So that's bullet point number one. Bullet point number two is going to be talking about ableism in environmentalism. I'm actually gonna talk and give a quick overview of a paper that was written about this in the UK, which I think provides fantastic lessons that are applicable in the US as well. And then finally, some high-level actions for accessible, inclusive climate resilience. So the framework, the way that we can think about climate change and disability is that climate change has numerous impacts on society. I think you all know that probably through a lot of your work. And then there are also many types of disabilities and aspects of living with a disability. There are physical and physiological factors. There are social factors. There are policy factors that lead to kind of large levels of oppression in the disability community, and these can vary by location. By the way, I say oppression, but not all of these are necessarily oppression related, but it's just aspects of disability living that then kind of open up our community to disproportionate climate impacts. So in terms of climate change impacts, just think about this. I'm going to break this up. We've got 8 categories on the left of climate change impacts, 8 categories of disability factors on the right. Cool. So here's a column. By the way, this is Mid-Journey's someone with a disability and a heat wave. So there you go with that. Okay, so all right, got the column on the left. Extreme weather impacts in general and specifics, damaged infrastructure, economic consequences, right? So And I'll talk just a little bit about economic consequences and what that might mean for the disability community. Harm to government capacities. So if the economy gets hurt, right? Let's say there's fewer jobs, fewer goods and services available, less tax money that then goes into the government. The government has less tax money to then provide social services to the disability community, and the government might be spending more money on climate, maybe not necessarily resilience, but certainly addressing and then responding to disaster, natural disasters and other climate consequences. There can be effectively uninhabitable areas, and that could lead to dislocation as well. And then also this next one, dislocation and proactive migration can come off of places being effectively uninhabitable, as well as acute disasters displacing people. Spreading disease is another concern. In California, we have issues with more kind of mosquitoes and vector-borne illnesses. And then social upheaval and conflict, which, my God, I hope we don't have to deal with that here, but it's an issue that comes up with environmental stress. Then the disability factors and factors of disability living, you've got broad categories such as mobility or intellectual and developmental disability. You can look at specific disabilities such as multiple sclerosis, spinal cord injury. You could go into details about different types of intellectual and developmental disabilities, chronic health conditions, etc. Use of or need for government services, and then use of medical care, personal care attendants, etc. The disability community, a lot of us have kind of a very close relationship with the medical system, and then also with caregivers and direct support networks. Housing needs, so this would be accessible housing. This could also be, housing where, let's say, somebody is sensitive to temperature swings, having housing that has pretty good insulation and maybe HVAC and air conditioning. As Vance mentioned just a minute ago, though, if you don't have enough money to then get those housing needs met, then that could be an issue. Mobility and transportation. So on the one hand, you've got people with disabilities have lower rates of car ownership. So that can affect their mobility choices and kind of use public transit more. On the flip side, you have some people with disabilities where they cannot easily bike, they cannot walk long distances or walk at all, and then they use personal vehicles more often than maybe they would even prefer to. And then economic barriers and opportunities. So these are economic barriers being a lot of discrimination in the job market, and then different kind of restrictions on how much you can earn and save to be eligible for benefits. And then opportunities are really, okay, if we open up, for example, more assistive technology, then what does that mean for people with disabilities, increasing their income, getting more jobs and higher income and kind of more stability there. And then intersectional factors, anytime that somebody is in a member of another oppressed community or has lower income, then that can exacerbate kind of just stresses that come with disability. And then we ask ourselves, what is climate change and disability? Well, climate change and disability is every single one of those colored lines in the center. It's a connection between a certain type of extreme weather and people with disabilities housing needs. It's a connection between harm to government capacities and then what does that do for use of or need for government services, right? And this can be broken up. This is high level right here. There are just countless connections that we can draw and then say, okay, this is a piece of the climate disability puzzle. And all of these taken together are helping to paint a picture of the excess exposure that people with disabilities face to climate change. And then also, if you go into it, you can say, well, we know these excess exposures. How can we minimize them? How can we create equity in the face of climate change, and then also how can we use adaptation as an opportunity to improve the quality of life of the disability community. So I'll talk a little bit later about actions that we can take to address that, but I'm going to pivot now to this article, Ableism and Disableism in the UK Environmental Movement. Feel free to take your phones out and take a photo of that QR code, or just go to bit.ly/49HJ9PQ. If you search academia.edu for that article, then it will come up for free with a free account also. But it highlights, it was basically a study, a bunch of qualitative interviews with 37 different participants with disabilities that have broad environmental concerns and interacted with the environmental movement over there. It highlights a couple of different sustainability paths. So it talks about what she calls weak sustainability, which is economic growth and technological progress, still allowing for economic growth, and then technological progress minimizes climate impacts. Then there's strong sustainability, which is degrowth and what she calls traditional independence, which would be kind of, oh, hey, I'm going to farm my own little garden. I'm going to have my backyard garden. I'm going to do all of these things to be able to live relatively independently in concert with nature. And then, as I said, yeah, there were 37 participants. They participated in various types of environmental NGOs and intentional communities. So just community groups, not an official nonprofit. It wasn't all bad. Some people felt empowered and appreciated efforts at inclusion and access. But some of the bad things were physical access was often an issue, especially with outdoor activities and meetups. There was a lack of accessible information, including accessible websites and information about accessibility for activities within those environmental organizations. People said that accessing and attending protests was often difficult to impossible because of accessibility barriers or just lack of consideration by the protest organizers. There were some implicitly ableist discourse. Now, when we say ableist, the difference between ableism and disableism is ableism focuses on able-bodiedness as normal, and that disability is kind of an aberration or something different than that, and that designing the world for able-bodiedness is A-okay. Disableism is active oppression and discrimination against the disability community, and they're intertwined. So when we talk about implicitly ableist discourses, that was especially around cycling and physical activities. Some people, and this is the disableism, felt judgment on unsustainable aspects of disability, including using cars and medications that had been tested on animals and were in gelatin capsules. A couple of quotes from here say that disabled people's perspectives, however, also have the potential to problematize the simplistic binaries and ableist assumptions in the environmental movement and discourses. So this can create both risk and opportunity for disabled people engaging with environmentalism. We can bring a lot of really, really cool perspectives. We can challenge those perspectives and hopefully lead to progress as opposed to pushback, but pushback is a risk. And then without the expertise and lived experience of disabled members, though, gains made by the environmental movement might lead to further exclusion of disabled people if we are redesigning society and we don't do it in an inclusive way. It's hard to retrofit it afterwards, and we may actually make things less accessible or just simply marginalize people with disabilities more than they already are. The last quote here is that moves toward inclusivity will require the participation and leadership of disabled people if they are to be effective. This is kind of the classic disability mantra of nothing about us without us. So what do we do? Questions here are, how do we address the copious disproportionate impacts faced by people with disabilities. Number two, how do we create more accessible, inclusive resilience and adaptation? Three is how can we process, how can this process not just prevent harm, but actively improve the lives of people with disabilities? And then how does ableism and disableism fit into the in the environmental movement fit into this? So in terms of broad actions and what we can do, so first of all, nothing about us without us. So maximize disability inclusion and participation in resilience efforts. This would simply be lots of, workshops, focus groups, surveys, participation, and then I would say also for NGOs, for government agencies to do active outreach and recruitment of the disability community, and certainly those that are hiring to actively try to hire people with disabilities and weave disability into DEI efforts. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion. Bullet point number two, develop sustainable and accessible built environments. So, someone in another meeting I was in was talking about density, right? So we know that density is more environmentally sustainable than sprawl. We also know that flat homes are easier for people with disabilities to move around instead of multi-level homes and homes with stairs. So I do housing activism. I know it's a contentious topic, but I think that expansion, for example, of more new apartments and having increased density can be really good for the disability community, because then that is more sustainable because fewer people are using cars. We can have better transportation networks. There's less sprawl and destruction of the environment through wildland development. And then it's more accessible because you have more density makes it so that people don't need cars, so that people who, say, use mobility equipment and have kind of a limited radius that they can go in their day can reach more things closer to their home, right? And then they have kind of flat apartments without stairs. So this is how those built environments can really help. Then disability inclusive disaster response and recovery. That's Vance's wheelhouse, and there are a lot of really amazing disability organizations working on this. If you are interested in this, see what Vance is doing, and then otherwise check out like the Partnership for Inclusive Disaster Strategies. Basically, if you Google disability inclusive disaster response, there's tons of resources out there. Then prioritize weak sustainability while safeguarding government and social services. One of the problems that was brought up about weak sustainability is that it can kind of continue the neoliberal paradigm that can contribute to oppression of people with disabilities. And that's why I say make sure that we have, some growth, mainly because shrinkage of the economy endangers government services and revenues, and then also can kind of create some increased competition that marginalizes oppressed groups like people with disabilities. Then challenge any strong sustainability that has ableist assumptions or disableism. I, with my spinal cord injury, am not going to be tilling my own backyard garden. So if that is kind of the route that some people want to go toward, just make them recognize that, like, hey, this isn't going to work for everybody, and you're really risking harm to folks if we try to redesign society around this without recognizing the need for some sort of modern medicine, modern infrastructure, and social services. So then finally, the last couple here are to look for win-win opportunities that increase sustainability, access, and inclusion. One example would be more resilient grids. More resilient and sustainable grids are useful for preventing the blackouts that can leave so many people with disabilities stranded. You live on an upper floor and the elevator goes out, then you're stranded and there's issues there. But if we create really good, resilient, clean microgrids, then that safeguards those power needs while also making a more sustainable system. And then the last one is to do research and policy development for specific pieces of the climate disability puzzle. For example, heat waves and spinal cord injury, which is something that's close to my heart. But my goodness, you could take any of those lines that I showed up top, or any of your own lines that you decide to look into research and work on. So that's that. I know there's a lot of activists here, and I'm talking about research, but just look into it. And if you have opportunities to do research and community engagement, then more power to you. And thank you for doing it. And that is my time. So thanks, Cheryl and the team, for hosting me. And I'm here for a minute.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Alex. It's been a few years since I've seen you. You're still, you're looking good. You got a great presentation. I really appreciate you being here, and I appreciated you being at our other events in prior years too. It's good to see you again. We haven't seen so many people since COVID, so I'm glad to have this opportunity to connect with you again. And that was a great presentation. It gave us some excellent actions that we can take. I love the fact that you said nothing about us without us. That was amazing, as well as now I hope I can find it. I thought I copied it into my notes here. Sadie said something that, oh yeah, to not know and do nothing about it is forgivable. To know and do nothing about it is admirable. To know and do nothing about it is unforgivable. And that's just like that in this time of war and everything that's going on, I thought like that was a great comment, because we have to speak up, speak out, and make sure that we're all going to be viable and successful, accessible, and all these other things. So I appreciated everything that I heard this morning and everyone's participation. We're in some tumultuous times, and we just have to find the joy and continue to smile. I know it's hard for me right now with this Palestine, Gaza genocide that we're watching in real time. It's just a trying time. That's all I have to say. It's like, it's just unbelievable that we have to, here we are. So, but we have to keep our sanity in this insane time and make sure that we are looking out for each other and being community with each other and to show love for one another, because we are all human beings and we deserve to live and we deserve to thrive and we deserve to smile. And it's important that we show up, speak up. And I just wanted to say that during this time, my sister and I have been every night at 6:00, we say a little prayer for peace in the world, because all these wars aren't good for our climate. They're not good for humanity, and we just have to pray for peace. So I want to thank the speakers. I want to thank the planning committee for the CEMTF and the steering committee. So I want to thank Jack, Karina, Eduardo, myself, and Reverend Smith and Deacon Jones. And I want to thank Karis and Janelle and Livy and Natalie. Sorry, I'm spacing out here. I haven't had enough coffee. And I want to thank all our speakers, Vance, Sadie, Alex, Emma, Henry, Sheila, and Makai. Makai and I are also a part of the Equity Summit, a Berkeley Equity Summit Alliance, a BIPOC community organization. And she's also part of Friends of Adeline. And I want to thank my sister for being here. And again, Anthony, I mean, not Anthony, Carl Anthony and Paloma Pavel for being here. And all of you for taking this time this morning to be here and listen and hear about climate ableism and accessibility. And we need to make sure that, we are all be safe. So check in on your neighbors, check in on your block, so that, in case of an emergency, at least you know who your neighbors are, what they might need, so that you can help them. I feel like we have to stay in contact in our community in these tumultuous times, and the holiday season's coming up. We still have COVID. Those numbers are continuing, and just be mindful of all those things. And if you can get up and get out and speak up on and join the protests and rallies and marches for a ceasefire and to end the genocide, I would suggest to do that if you can. But and if you can join us at 6 o'clock, wherever you are, however you pray, or just even just meditate on peace, that would be amazing. So thank you again for being here today, and you all have a blessed rest of your day and an excellent holiday season. And if you're in the Bay Area, and if you're able and willing and want to go to the sunrise ceremony on the Turkey Day, because that's such a beautiful experience, you'll be happy you did. So enjoy the season. Our next events are in January, Climate and Gender. And then in March is Climate and the Imprisoned Industrial Complex. So join us then, register, donate. Thank you for your donations, and have a great season. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Bye, Karina. Jack. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Karina.
Thank you, everybody.
It was really, really a wonderful morning. I enjoyed it tremendously. Have a blessed day.